this question is for Commissioner Williams. As now the regulator of the largest market for carbon capture and geologic storage, help us connect the dots between the benefits of geologic storage, carbon capture, and CO2-driven enhanced oil recovery. And then in general, what steps can Texas take to remain competitive in the energy arena given the current economy? What should the Texas legislature concentrate on?
You want me to give them advice?
Someone asked me.
You know, which makes I don't give advice, I listen. You know, I mean, where we are now, I just say one of the reasons why we've always thought that we could be the leader in this regard is because we have all of the sort of the elements, and obviously we have mining companies in the state, we've got power gens, and we've got pipelines that move an enormous amount of CO2. We've got an economy that is going to attract more infrastructure development, and we have at least one opportunity at the end of this stream, and that's the CO2 EOR, where a large portion of our daily production is coming from, about a quarter almost of our daily production is in CO2 EOR. We've got one way. But one of the things that we saw in China, quite frankly, is that as Mark was looking at between the two sort of strategies of CO2 containment and then renewables, they're looking at that hybrid. And the hybrid is how can we make CO2 a commodity? And in addition to CO2 EOR, how might we be able to use that CO2, join it with some algae, throw in some cancer cells, and end it up with some diesel, okay? And one of the things that we can do is obviously look at how can we incentivize other developments, other technologies that will use CO2 as a commodity. We think of ourselves as being unique because we see CO2 as a commodity as opposed to waste. And if we want to do that, we've got to sort of identify other ways to use CO2 other than EOR, because we won't be able to eat up all the CO2 that we're going to produce, be able to capture in this state with EOR. Even though we have enormous opportunities, we're going to need some other. So what other things can we do? So one of the things that I'm not in the habit in the next 140 days to give the legislature advice, but one of the things that I think it would behoove us to be seriously consider are doing the same things that we've done in the last 3 legislative sessions that's related to CO2 going to EOR, doing it for other purposes. How can we use that CO2? What other things can we put CO2 to, such that we can utilize it?
So I got a question here about just specific examples of R&D technology sharing. So we talked about one that seems the most obvious is how can we help the Chinese find a commodity value to CO2.
It's probably not. I mean, I was fascinated by the discussion we saw at NAN about the underground gasification, because I think there's a real opportunity for us to utilize technology like that here in the U.S. And even though I am not aware of many similar demonstrations here in the U.S., but if we can develop that technology here in the U.S., obviously it puts us, I think, in a great stead. And that obviously is an opportunity to transfer technology back to them. But I was fascinated by that discussion.
Right, that's something that I'm not sure everybody in the room understands. That some of us, I think, understood this, but boy, you see it in reality when you talk to these guys. They're building a lot of gasifiers. They're gasifying a lot of coal. But the driver, and it doesn't make there less people because of it, is not environmental.
Correct.
It's that they don't have enough natural gas to feed their industrial production sector. Okay?
Well, think about 85% of the energy in the country is coal. And then most of the natural gas that they consume in the country, they're piping in from the friendly Russians. And to the extent that they have some natural-based natural gas. The gentleman who now ENN is one of these franchise or private businesses, and his primary provider of his natural gas commodity is the government. And he's afraid that he may get cut off at some point in time if he does. What natural gas is he going to provide in his LDC to get to move to his customers? And so he's really thinking not for an environmental purpose. He's trying to move from coal to gas. So he's using the gasifier to make more natural gas molecules so that he might, at some point in time, if he has to, he'll be able to move that gas to his residential commercial customers.
That seems to be a great opportunity in terms of, they have a national security driver there, and honestly, we share that. We do not, I think, I know, as Americans, need China dependent on a big, giant Russian gas pipeline. Okay, I think that's a fair statement. It was a little scary a couple of times, to be honest with you, as Americans sitting there talking to some of these guys about how much dependence they're starting to grow.
The Europeans have experienced that a couple of times when the pipeline has gotten turned off. And so we don't want any of our allies, obviously, to be in that situation. The other thing is, not only do they have coal, but they're going to keep importing coal. I mean, they're basically going to do a hostile takeover of Australia one day. So that they don't own coal in Australia, and it's right there. I mean, it's in the same relative hemisphere. So
Well, they got 4 million tons of coal from the U.S. last year alone. So, the increase from something like 2,700 tons just 2 years before. I mean, they're dramatically increasing their importation of all kinds of fuel sources. Plus 50% of their the crude they use in the country is imported. They've gone from 3% to 10% in terms of natural gas importation. So
It's interesting, it's just to kind of draw a bow around that whole discussion, is you have a foreign policy driver that will commercialize gasification faster and will benefit from that. I mean, the more they commercialize gasification, the more we'll be able to implement that technology at a lower cost. The more we commercialize that technology, maybe we'll get them to do some of the environmental pieces, to Brian's point. And then on the flip side, and I think Michael will be central to this discussion, I think this is the next step of the evolution of this trip perhaps, is what we know about CO2 EOR. Because we want them to be domestically secure for oil and coal, to be frank, in my opinion, because I think their neighbors are a lot scarier than they are because of some of the challenges they have, that Barry mentioned. They have such a massive problem just to keep up with themselves that, if you read some of these scholars, not Thomas Friedman, but I guess who's the other Friedman from the most recent book of the next 100 years, and that discussion is about they're going to have to keep themselves busy dealing with their own problems, but if they become over-dependent on some of these hostile regimes for oil and for gas, it could be a problem. So I think that maybe there's some real collaboration there that we can have not just good environmental benefits, but actually some foreign policy benefits.